Thank you. Afternoon. So I know this is towards the end of the day. There is a huge risk, of course, that a speaker at the end of the day ends up repeating all the things that you've heard during the day. And I just want to reassure you, I'm completely aware of that risk, and I intend to do it anyway. So I'm going to talk about who owns the security of the IoT. You notice I don't use the word liability. I'm not a lawyer. And actually, we haven't run through those legal cases yet that has determined what the liabilities will be, although there may be some use cases that we could look at. And I'm actually going to tell a story that's based around a very large form of Internet of Things, that of pipelines, refineries, and power grids, which has that interaction between IT and what the electricity guys called operational technology and what the oil and gas folk call ICS, industrial control system. And there we looked at security accountabilities and responsibilities rather being just passed around from one to the other. So the first slide you've seen before was the Internet of Everything type slide. It really is everything, so how do you start to narrow down that who will actually be responsible for securing the things that are going on in that environment? I do like the quote from Jeff Immelt of GE, where he talks about the industrial internet, and he's talking about things like those jet engines being monitored real time. And he says, it's not a cartoon and it's not a PowerPoint. But actually, this is real. We do it as part of what we actually do. And I think that's increasingly the case, that people are migrating to even more consumer technologies in the industrial space. So I think what we can just safely say is, it's all embracing. So what does that mean when we start to look at the security and the responsibility? So I'm going to show you a picture. I'm going to reuse this picture several times. And the picture shows you some devices, whatever they be, communicating in a wireless way to some sort of hub or router. That then talks up into the cloud. There's some service application, one over to the left-hand side. There's a service application, two to the right-hand side. And then some agent broker may actually come to join the things together and participate. I don't know if you've been using things like Siri. When I tell my students, who does Siri belong to? If you want to know who it belongs to, ask Siri what the best phone in the world is. And actually, in fairness to Apple, it says, you must be kidding, surely. And then after that, if you keep on at it, it does tell you it's an Apple. In the world of little data, we've got mobile devices, which often come to play. And the first thing that I saw in the industrial control world that surprised me was the ability to actually manage an industrial plant off your phone, which I thought was a very challenging issue when it comes to security. But what I want to talk about in this picture is, this could be an IT picture, couldn't it? So it could be devices at the bottom being PCs on a corporate network, communicating wirelessly. And then there might be another device somewhere else in the corporate network, and then cloud applications. This is standard IT. And when we worked with IT people in the industrial control space, we discovered they were different from the engineers. And I'm an IT person, so what I'm about to say, do take that into account. And that is, the engineers said that IT people were dangerous. They said that what we did was switch something off and turn it back on as a natural remediation act in order to manage a situation. And it's sort of unfortunately true. What we found out about the engineers was that they tended to follow process. They didn't just write it down, they actually followed it. And they used things called standards, and they used things called measurements that actually did it. And IT people were struggling with these, and we kept reinventing them. And what we found out when we brought these together in this industrial world, that the IT people actually had one huge benefit. They understood security was an issue, and the engineers didn't. So we had this world of engineers who actually could build robust things, didn't think about security. This group of IT people who understood about security and actually didn't seem to be capable of building a robust thing. And we were trying to bring this together to make it work. And I think this is what we're seeing going on today. And I'm going to replay some of that story. And I think we can go one of each way. We can go the engineering route on this, or we can go the IT route. And perhaps there might be a middle ground. Let's see where we go. Let me talk first of all about closed systems and ecosystems. I think the closed system for Internet of Things is a bit like this industrial example I gave, which is, somebody might buy a maintenance application, they might put some sort of sensors and monitors in their vehicles, and I'm sure you've seen these examples probably even earlier today. And that's a pretty closed system. And if you send me as a security professional to look at that, I'll look at the risks. I know what the use case is. I understand the type of technology being used. I got some sense of how it might change, but I've got a reasonably good view about what I'm dealing with. When we look at the ecosystem, things are rather different. So here's the home, and I buy the home thermostat, and that's one supplier and one cloud service. And I then buy the lighting, and that's another device and set of devices and a service. And I buy the home security system, might be another one. I then might want my car to interact with it. Now, all these, of course, are different services, different vendors, and somehow that ecosystem use case has to all work together in a secure way. I know people who have their garages unlocked when their car drives up. I mean, I'll have my lights come on in the house at the moment, so I'm going as far as that, but I'm not quite as far. So how do we think ecosystem where the use case isn't even known at the time that you design a system? So who is responsible for security in that? I'm now going to give the picture that you've seen. But remember, I'm talking about who is responsible for security. So who is responsible for security for this particular situation? So I don't know how much you had to explain because I wasn't here during the talk, but these researchers attacked via the Sprint network. They could manage to get an audio, video, phone, road assist, those sort of functionality. But then, of course, they worked out they could penetrate the controller, the V850, reprogram it, and get across into more interesting things like door locks, air conditioning, acceleration, etc. So, is it the manufacturer of the vehicle who is responsible for that security? Is it the designer of the V850 chip that allowed that to be happened or actually allowed its firmware to have that vulnerability? Well, the manufacturer decided it would own up and say, well, someone's got to do something about this, so they said, come into our dealers. Now, that's what they would do for anything that they considered to be a problem with their vehicle. And you now know the next part of the story, don't you? Which is that the users complained and said, this is outrageous. What do you mean I've got to go and drive to my dealer and have this fitted and have it changed? And they therefore caved. And so Jeep caved under the pressure. And we know what they did. They sent everyone a nice letter and a USB stick. Thereby immediately opening up a vector for all of us with vehicles that might possibly take USB sticks as part of their upgrade system. I'm now going to look very suspiciously. This is a new way of affecting a vehicle. Now, what I think they did wrong, when they sent out the USB stick, they transferred ownership of security to the end user. And at that point, they said, it's your car, you secure it. I'll give you the capability to do so. So it's a bit like software providers in IT have been saying to us for decades, which is it's your job to patch your machine. We'll provide you the patches. And we have to ask ourselves, is that a sensible and wise model when we migrate that to the Internet of Things? In fact, I think even Microsoft will now accept that isn't an acceptable model, although I do remember debating a few years ago with them about it. And of course, now that if you buy an upgrade to Windows 10, you don't get a choice unless you really find out where in the registry to switch off the upgrades, because it just does it. I think Microsoft have finally said, no end users, your track record. And the track record of end users is not great. So let's cover that in a minute. So who's responsible for security? Is it service application one in this situation, talking to the device? Is it the other service, or is it this poor little end user? And I call them poor little end user because their track record is not great. I did some personal research. I decided I would look at what I had connected to my network across 2 locations. I actually found 74 devices. Now, I know that makes me a little bit geeky, and some of those were routers, and some of those were switches, and some of them were servers, and some of them were PCs, and some of them were iPads and phones, etc., etc. Skyboxes and TVs and 3 light bulbs, 1 thermostat, a range of varying other sensors. And I said, I will get myself in a fit state to give a lecture like this, and I'll make sure it's all secure. Well, actually, the IT stuff was relatively straightforward because I knew how to do that. And actually, some of the IoT I bought was upgrading itself and looking after its own security. One had gone to sleep for 6 months and not done its upgrades. I hadn't noticed that. I didn't know that the audio system had not been upgrading itself, so I fixed that. The worst one, I had to find out who manufactured the board inside the device so I could find the website of the OEM, download the latest firmware, create an SSH session between my PC running PuTTY so that I could then do an upload. Now, clearly, the end user needs to do that, and my mother, in her 80s, is going to have to get on with that as a matter of course. Clearly, that's not right. And I don't think we can expect end users, because frankly, their track record is not great. Breached webcams, breached baby monitors, and even their Wi-Fi systems are insecure, possibly not helped by the vendor who even will have secret passwords inside that even a security person can't find. But end users, really, bottom line, bad track record. So, who is responsible for security? How about this service provider I've been highlighting here? They've given me a light bulb. Surely they should look after the security of that light bulb. That would be a reasonable thing for me to ask. What about the security interacting with the other service application? Well, okay, let's ask the question. Are service providers looking after our security at the moment? Well, I said some are, some aren't. Actually, I think you remember the story of the televisions. That there were two examples, weren't there? One said to turn the camera and the microphone off, tick the box, and then the tick didn't do anything. And the other example was, in order to have the functionality that you wanted, the TV really, in its 46-page privacy policy, actually did say that you've got to have it all switched on in order for it to work properly. And I do like Michael Price, the academic lawyer, who got out 1984 George Orwell and the privacy policy, and he got the relevant paragraphs and sort of tried to match them up. So Big Brother is going to watch us. What's wrong with this? What's wrong with this is, I think it says that the vendor has got the wrong idea about what the user would expect. And I don't think the consumer product companies, who are, after all, telling the engineers what to build, don't yet have that security or privacy ethic. That if we are to trust them to be the owners of the security, that we would rely on them having. So, back to the story. Well, actually, let's look inside the device. And I've had a little OEM card pop out the side, and there's a chip on it. So, should it be the chip providers? I've seen a few presentations this afternoon about chips and their capabilities, and that's very good. Should it be the phone manufacturer because the service provider develops the app but not the phone? So, who should be concerned about the security? Who should own it? Well, let's look at the IT case. Well, we know that TPMs in IT kit have been around for quite a long time. I actually know companies that have deployed TPMs across IT kit and never switched on a single one. So just because you've deployed the capability doesn't mean you've utilized the capability. And so one of the lessons that we've had, certainly in the IT world, around security, is that you've got to look at the whole thing with absolute intent that you'll go forward with owning the security service, and it won't just be, oh yeah, I've got a chip in there, I might use it sometime, perhaps. And the hard bit is not the chip. Apologies to the chip manufacturers, because you guys have had it sorted for a long time. The hard bit for everybody else is getting to integrate it and use it in a secure way. And that's what tends to hold people up. So I think the service provider is in a fairly good case to sort of do a reasonable job to try and worry about the security of this. And perhaps, as I say, in some cases in my house, they were starting to look after that. However, in other houses, they haven't done a great job. This was HP's research back in 2014. You've had all the vulnerability stuff. I did think the smart toilet attack was the most entertaining, but anyway, we'll move on. So why aren't we getting it designed and deployed as secure if, frankly, the service provider should be the one that's worrying about it, if that's the case? Do IT systems get designed and deployed as secure? Interesting question. Well, actually, those who work in security will know when security gets thought about quite often, which is when you do that pen test just before it goes live. And then you discover that it wasn't built with a development life cycle that actually allowed the code to be created without some of those flaws in it that it shouldn't have had in the first place. So security is still lagging in its afterthought. And this idea of build-in security, security by design, is still surprisingly difficult to deploy across many organizations. And that's the world of IT. That's not the world of safety and engineering. The world of safety and engineering actually says, I need that certified. I'd heard the previous speaker and what he meant about certified, but hey, how about having it certified that it can actually upgrade itself and look after itself in a secure way? At the moment, we don't have that in so many cases. And so we have a world where actually, well, I'll accept what I have. Common criteria, how many of us fought and struggled to get anything through that process unless there was a strong government backing. I give this talk and my student says, oh, Paul, we've tried this for decades. You're just wasting your time. We just don't care enough about security to do it right. So who is responsible for security? And we back down to this portal end user. So here I am at home now struggling to deal with this. And I can buy secure devices. Hopefully they're looked after by service applications. Well, actually I can't because I don't know how secure they are. I've got to do a lot of work on them. But let's say I can. I've still got this ecosystem problem. Someone described it as your fridge attacks your TV, which is a strange concept. But I guess if it's a different manufacturer, perhaps you can knock it over and make it less reliable, and then you want to buy from the other manufacturer? Or is that a surreal concept? I gave this a bit of thought, and I think I can extrapolate from the talk that went before me. So how about the hub? Why about the hub, rather than being a security problem, the hub being a security solution? And the hub says, I'm sorry, you don't talk to TVs. I don't get the use case, so you can't. Or actually, didn't you know what? You're an unpatched device, and I think I better go and call home for you and look after you. Now, here I'm suddenly introducing a security service concept into my life as an end user. Would I want to do that? Well, I might buy a maintenance contract for some of the services and equipment that I have in, like a boiler, or I can buy a plumbing contract to run services. So should I be doing something like that? So are hubs the hope? Here are 3 hubs. So far, I don't know why, and I know there are telcos and ISPs in the room. I don't know why you guys don't sell me security services. I think it was only government pressure, and complain if I'm being unfair, that actually means I can do children protection by family filtering on my network. But I want better than that. I actually want as clean a pipe as I can get and something that will look after my environment. So could I actually subscribe to a service? Because we security guys working in enterprises know if you don't monitor security, you don't get security. Well, how am I going to monitor security in my own home? It isn't going to happen. Perhaps somebody else could do that. Perhaps ADT could find a way of getting some business when everyone buys IoT alarm systems and does away with their alarm centers. Perhaps they should start monitoring our own home IT systems as part of their security service. There we are. If there's anyone there from the alarm companies, there's a business. Anyone here from telco and ISP? Here, there might be a business here. How will this come about? I think it's going to come about through collaborative standards. And we've heard about the importance of open standards. I think open standards are great, but I know what tends to happen is that industries and collaborative groups will tend to drive things a bit faster. So I've listed some of these up here in terms of the industry initiatives, and if I've missed yours, sorry, and I'll happily add it to the list. I won't name it. I did go to one of them and said, great, I'm looking at security in this environment. Can I have a copy of your security standards? After a bit of complaining, they eventually gave it to me, and it had half of it with this section saying, to be completed, which I thought was a bit depressing in terms of a standard. But hey, there are some initiatives that will deliver. I work in the energy sector, so I'm pretty happy with the work that's being done around things like smart metering and also the smart grids in the sector. So when a particular group can get their head around it, we can make it work. But who is responsible for security? Well, if we lay out the security requirement and standard, perhaps we can lay out the requirements across a supply chain in that standard. So back in my days, again, of defining a system in oil and gas, if we wanted a secure refinery, we needed it to have a secure process plant. That needed it to have a secure operating system that was provided by a different manufacturer. That needed it to have other secure components that were structured up. And we had this cascade of who is responsible for security that ran down that. And my job as the final end customer, admittedly a sophisticated one on the basis that we had a team and it was a big corporation, was to get that cycle as fast as possible. We actually published a league table. And we told the vendors that this is the number of days it takes for when we know that you can fix that problem because it's available and you actually deployed it in a tested way for our environment. And so we tried to get that whole knock-on responsibility. I think there should be something like this, and the standards should sign people up to service levels. I think that's the way forward. This is tiny text, so I'm just going to use it to highlight what I would call a framework. And I would really like everybody in that chain to sign up to a framework that defines the Internet of Things security. And the first one down at the strategy level, which is what is the leadership goal for a particular... If I was to predict an automotive company that will probably, I might go and speak to them, but they'll probably throw me out. An automotive company that was prepared to say, we will stand up for integrity of software in automotive systems. It's probably going to be Volkswagen, isn't it? Because now's the time to take some high ground. And I think there's a chance to take high ground in a number of these things. And we need some beacons and figureheads around the responsible for security to say, part of what we do is going to be secure. In the same way people don't say, part of what we do is being really unsafe. And I think there's an opportunity to do that. And then it makes it a lot easier to line up those ducks if the corporation. Looking at development, we do have to build it in so that we develop our systems in a secure way. And my students, as I said to you, say, oh, Paul, come on. We don't have that. Haven't you heard of Agile? And haven't you heard of the way that we develop things? Well, I'm hoping we're going to develop it in an engineering way, which means that we will do it in a much more thought out and robust life cycle than a typical IT life cycle. And we really think through those use cases to make things resilient. Why? Because I think I could cope with an IT environment that wasn't built right, where I could cope with an IoT environment that's not built right, when we've got to rush around and collect 50 billion devices and fix them. Even in small examples, I've known of devices embedded high up in roofs where you'd have to get cherry pickers or helicopters or something to go and deal with them. And you go, well, by then, we should have got it right the first time. In terms of operation, we know we've got to build these things in a robust way so that they will resist attack, they will detect attack, and they'll report attack. I don't know how many people have an IoT system that says, I've just been attacked. That would be an interesting thing to build in. And then we should go around the whole evolution cycle. So finally, I do think that the system provider, and by that I mean the system provider at the particular point in that flow. So if it's the person giving me my light bulb, it's the light bulb provider. If it's the person building the board for the light bulb provider, it's the board builder. If it's the person writing the software, I think that whole chain needs to own up to its responsibilities for that ongoing security management. And part of that is the preservation of ownership, which was the thing about that Jeep, which was if someone else could take ownership of it, that means we've got to have clarity about who has authority and ownership, and perhaps those standards groupings can achieve that. We need them to be resilient. We need it to be somehow future-proof. That's hard. And we need it to be an end-to-end view, and that's why, again, I think we've got to look at that supply chain in a full end-to-end way. So, you expected a single answer. I didn't give you a single answer. I gave you actually a chain of answers. What I would suggest is that everybody starts a parallel strategy and architectural vision that is different from what we've done before. It's not engineering that doesn't know security. It's not IT that knows security but somehow has had real trouble getting this stuff deployed and implemented. Let's actually claim an IoT space around engineering where we understand the problem and we can actually engineer some good answers. So, do we take action? Do we react? Or will it take regulation? And I think in some sectors it may end up in that space. For the rest of us, I hope we get there first. Thank you.